Thank you. Thank you, INCOSE, for the opportunity to talk about energy today as well. I see myself here for really a couple reasons. One is NASA and the relationship that the Great Lakes Energy Institute and Case Western Reserve have with them in Cleveland has been a long-standing and strong member of INCOSE, so thank you to NASA. And as well, my opportunity to work for 25 years in private industry and energy, and now the last 5 in academia, and what I really see as a lot of public and private connection that's growing between those organizations and including government. Great Lakes Energy Institute, and this is the only part where I'll talk directly about the university, and then I'll talk about a couple programs later, but our role is looking at energy across those areas where our faculty are very strong. And the couple that I'll pick up vignettes later will be electricity systems, power management, and the lifetime and degradation reliability work. But over the next 40 minutes, what I hope to do is look forward and spend a little bit of time, about a handful of slides on where our energy trends showing us they're going, because I believe as systems engineers, one of our opportunities is to be able to understand what we're trying to set as objectives, and where energy is going helps do that. A historical perspective, because I always believe that looking at history helps predict the future. Vignettes of past systems that have been in the oil and gas sector, where I've been a part of them, what I think went right, and some of the things that may have gone wrong. There'll be very brief vignettes. And then vignettes of future systems, where I'll try to get to somewhat quickly, because I think these are very interesting areas for system engineers, software modeling, and a lot of the things that are resident inside of this room. I'll finish today talking a bit on one slide about how INCOSE can help in this energy world. So in energy trends, first of all, it's noteworthy that I've taken a handful of slides from BP's statistical review. This is the 62nd year, I believe, that it's been put out, and one of the things I like about it, looking at trends, and it is open to anybody to take a look at, you can see the slides on their website and use them, is that they take a look at trends by also imagining and introducing what they think will happen with investments, technology, infrastructure, as well as with policy. Obviously, when it comes to energy, the population growth that is anticipated in the next 20 years, the GDP growth that's anticipated so that others can afford the lifestyle we've been able to live, lead to the far right and an expectation for primary energy growth that's 40% over this period. So one of the key requests and requirements of energy is to be able to look as engineers at how do we meet the needs of this primary energy growth. And noteworthy and not inconsistent with many other population indications as well as energy growth is that this will happen in the developing parts of the world. The mature markets are named in a club, and it's used here as OECD, the developing world as non-OECD, and you'll see that in a couple other slides. So it's not only thinking about the infrastructure we live in, but more so that infrastructure that we don't live in. When you take a look at the growth as to where this is going to happen, I'll look to the middle part of this picture, because one of the themes I'll have throughout is what I call exciting opportunity, the significant growth in power generation. It's expected in this 20 years in BP's outlook to be some 49%, the largest growth that sits here in this period. And I'll go through a bit of where that growth comes from, and then later in the vignettes, where opportunities are beginning to emerge right away. By fuel, a couple clear pictures. Obviously, the growth in fuel, and that is where this slide sits, still is predominantly in the fossil fuel, coal, gas, and oil. And yet, renewables is at a 7.5% growth rate anticipated through this period, one of the highest. Still in a policy world that has subsidies to create that, and one of the great challenges over this 20 years is to look at how to be able to get the economics of that system down to a level where it can compete on a complete playing field. Now I'll talk about the power sector. And I select this, first of all, on the left-hand side, and it is important, to the left and right of those dotted lines is not additive because the left is using some of the information from the power sector on the right. But I choose it because power sector specifically, and this chart again is just growth over the 19-year period, is obviously in the same space as we talked about earlier, in India, China, and growth in the Middle East. On the right-hand side, I think two very interesting things about the power sector. One that has been a trend for the last several years, and that is the tremendous amount of shifting to offer a variety of fuels to create power. We at Case Western Reserve University believe that the power choices of the future will be dependent upon the region that you reside in. And the idea that power is created by so many types of sources, and that switching really has gone on over just the last 25 years or so to a large extent, continues in the next 20 years in terms of BP's outlook. And the other is the great growth here in the power sector. If you take the renewables, the nuclear, and the hydro, it's more than half of the growth that exists in that sector. So again, I'll talk about power, but I think it holds two very promising pieces: the diversity of supply and the great growth that is expected to come from these non-fossil fuel areas. I place shale in here just because of the critical importance that it has played in a very short period to the energy landscape. That short period, a couple things I find very interesting. One is obviously the great shale development production growth occurs in this look-through and in many others in North America, and yet the resource is global. It exists in many, many populations. And so this in North America picture really presents the openness of investment that's happening right now in the U.S., the understanding and appreciation of the shale resource, the access to the shale, and the potential then to process it and get it to markets. It is not a measure of purely where the resource resides, but the marketplace ability to bring that resource to bear. And I trust, myself personally, not necessarily part of the view here from BP, that this, if we look 10 years forward and 10 years beyond that and watch these statistical reviews, that shale picture will change around the world as well. I also want to just mention that everything we're reading as of late about the potential for the United States to become self-sufficient in energy, much of that resides in the natural gas opportunity of really just the last few years. And it shows the change of technology and the change of pace in energy, which I consider to have optimism around as a very interesting area. It shows the pace of change in 5-year increments that's going on. So significant power generation growth, multiple fuels, including renewables used in that power sector, and a very important role for policy. And I think it's been consistent with many of the sessions I've sat in the last couple of days, is the importance of policy and regulation and the importance of building the full system beyond what has often been an infrastructure strategy. It's critical to go beyond that into markets and into the policy and regulation. A historical perspective, again, I like to look at history to think about where it may be taking us. And I see this picture from EIA, recently was presented at Case from Betty Simpkins at Oklahoma State University. I find it very interesting. And what it's showing as you take a look from, 1775, is what the primary energy source has been, shifting from wood to coal, and the growth of oil and gas close behind it, the nuclear business, and the beginning, obviously, in the last several years of the renewable business. And I see two messages, one that helps me working in an academic institution to connect our faculty to industry and governments and national laboratories and such. And that is that regardless of what the timing is for whatever fuel, there have been periods of shift, significant periods of shift in primary energy, and what we look at as academics is what do we need to prepare for next? And what do we need to do in this present time to proliferate the need for energy? Because those pictures earlier on energy requirements show us we need all sources of energy. The other very interesting thing is that it's only in the last, 50 years or so, that you start to see that there are clearly more than one primary energy, that one's following another, a couple others are emerging. And so the great 100% at wood or 80% at coal start to shift to multiple sources. And I think both of those are very interesting to see by looking back at the course of history and imagining what that might mean. The last slide I'll share from BP's statistical review, but I think it's very interesting, is so why do you see some of these shifts? They show a picture of oil as a primary source and the shift from oil since 1978 with the tie they have here to price. And interestingly, on the right-hand side, it is where there is competition for oil that it's shifted the quickest. Transport, the top line, there are multiple challenges going on to look at transport and alternative fuels. I see there have been and are some sessions on that. But to date, the combustion engine has been very difficult to build an efficient system that has been able to tackle that. And because of that, transport still resides predominantly in oil, and because of that, the Department of Energy has major emphasis in trying to help move out of that space because of security of supply interest. But in the case like the bottom line with the power sector, as I talked earlier, more sources. Oil's a very small part on that chart earlier of the power sector, and for that reason, those sources have competed away oil as a primary energy source. The other interesting thing, I talked 1775 and the shift of curves that has been going on in this same shift is that the carbon intensity has been declining through this time. So really the major shifts as I see that have been going on in energy from the primary fuel perspective have happened because the next one that came in was more efficient. It was about economics, and most of it about open markets and economics. And along with that has also, in addition, come policy, and along with policy and economics, the fuel replacements have continued to bring the carbon emissions picture down. And obviously, just in the course of the last day, this wasn't planned, but many of you may have seen, I saw it last night and then read in the Wall Street Journal this morning about the continued interest in policy in terms of the coal industry. And so this is a very real topic right now that is open. If you take a look, obviously, at carbon molecules in the primary energy source of coal, they're greatly reduced when it became a primary energy source of oil. And as you move to natural gas, of course, there's one carbon, so it's greatly reduced again. And that's what's creating this type of picture. So looking at history, I think a growing reliance on multiple fuels, that far right last 50 years of the picture that suggests there's more than one tackling that primary energy top spot, and an interesting following of carbon reduction along with it. So let me talk about 3 vignettes of past systems in energy, and all of them that I've had an opportunity to play a piece in. The first, I wasn't here for this picture, but I did play a part, is Ohio Oil Company, Cleveland, Ohio, John Rockefeller, back at the end of the 1800s, so 1860, 1870 time period. Electricity coming online, a lot of folks believing that electricity should be the fuel of choice for transport. John Rockefeller comes in and builds an entire infrastructure, the leadership we often think of in energy, to be able to build a refining system, a pipeline system. It was railroads at that time, a depot and terminal system, a system of service stations, the entire infrastructure from start to finish. He chose not to go into production, but to go into bringing that to market and creating transport primary source off of this. And I think what we see is, as I mentioned earlier, still today, with the primary energy source of transport, this system and this fuel and in the combustion engine is still the most efficient and the predominant use. And yet, all systems have challenges with them, that if we think holistically of how to help the unintended consequences when we are in design as systems engineers, it can help the whole system. Still, 140 years later, one of those unintended consequences of what were termed monopolistic years, of what eventually broke that Ohio system into multiple oil companies, the Standard Oil of New Jersey, of New York, of Illinois, was all around monopolistic potential and monopolistic behaviors. And that sense of the oil industry has carried on for 140 years, and those are things in the design of new systems that we prefer not hold on to. The other thing that took place at that time was, obviously, there in western Pennsylvania wasn't a railway system that was strong or in place, and so pipeline systems emerged at that point. And there was tremendous competition between the two. And I challenge that some of the new systems we'll look at will be helped equally, if not more so, by collaboration, because that also has been a common theme, the necessary importance of collaborating and thinking, can you have both? Pipelines pretty much replaced rail for a lot of transport, and yet just today, if you Google, Tesoro has now announced their interest in railing their shale oil development across the country to the West Coast to bring it into the refining system in California, because the disparate location of all the fields doesn't have pipeline infrastructure ready or in the right places to be ready, and the rail system is. So thinking of how can you collaborate in the spaces with partners that could be there for a long, long time is very important as well. The second system, I spent 3 years running regulatory affairs for the natural gas and electricity business for BP in Houston, Texas. And one thing I thought that was fascinating about the natural gas business is this system of all these red pipes and all of these black dots of trading points and market system. First of all, much was created at a time when no one really wanted natural gas. Natural gas was the thing that came out of the ground with the oil, that if you can get rid of it for 50 cents an MMBTU and get to the stuff that's rich. We had 2 natural gas wells on our property outside Cleveland, Ohio. We were very sad. We didn't want natural gas. We wanted the oil, which a little of that came and a lot of natural gas came. Now, it was piped to our house. We had free gas, free air conditioning, and yet still everybody wanted to be in the oil business back in those days. So this infrastructure is built with a mission. Engineers, what's our primary objective? Think about what that mission is, and we can construct anything. I heard this yesterday. I thought it was a great point I've stolen, that you need to know the purpose. And that purpose was get this stuff into the system. In the 1980s, then, regulation came for the gas industry. And a point I want to make in the natural gas vignette of system creation is that an entire market had to be created for natural gas. And the idea that we had 30 points of inlets in the United States was easy to create a marketplace for deregulation of natural gas. So what we got from that was a very fungible system. Fungible used to mean there's only one product and it transfers throughout this system. We got incredible investment in storage. And storage in natural gas allowed the volatility to be reduced somewhat, because it could hold on to some of that volatility. This will be a theme later, talking about electricity systems, and it also allowed us to be able to store for major crises such as Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Rita, both of which I was in Houston at the time. So thinking of that storage and the fungibility, thinking of the idea it now was available nationwide and became very quickly used in stationary uses, factories, homes, and thinking of the idea that there are multiple participants. So lots of people can see the platform of natural gas and understand how to get onto it and participate in that market. All of those that I think are great for a system, great for competition, great for a marketplace and an open marketplace. One thing you may say that's tied, that may not have gone to where we would like to have seen it, is it hasn't. And price has been part of that. It's been well up and well down over the last few years. It hasn't made it into portable systems. The economics have not supported the ability to put it into portable systems. That may be safety reasons, it may be a number of reasons, but that is the great challenge that's sitting in front of us right now for the natural gas system, and the usage of this massive infrastructure would be helpful. And the last of vignettes from the past is the U.S. fuel system. So back in 1995, I was a trader for a refinery in the southeast United States, located in our trading organization in Cleveland. And at that time, we basically had three fuels: an unleaded, a mid-grade, because there was still mid-grade, and a premium. And because of the Clean Air Act, and a measure in gasoline is Reid vapor pressure, the measure of vaporization, the requirement changed in a fairly short period to say no longer will it be 3 gas grades. You will now have, during the summer, 4 different levels of fuel depending upon how clean your community is, RFG and different Reid vapor pressures. And by the way, for September to May, for the winter, you'll have 3 others that are introduced. So you're now running a system where you refine and pipe and have terminals and store and run stations on 3 systems that overnight you multiply 3 times really 7 gasolines, and you have to shift between them twice a year. There were enormous articles and debates at that time about this can't happen. And by the way, if it does, there'll be a lot of runouts. And the good side of the story is there weren't a lot of runouts. So what happened? What are the system interesting areas that changed at that time? Well, obviously, massive system changes had to be considered and dealt with to actually refine all of these different products. And those were dealt with and done. As well, collaboration between oil companies took place at a very quick pace, because you had to ship this in sizable batches. You have to ship so much or you can't get into the pipeline system. And you didn't need that much, so you better have friends in other places where you could work together. And you better have terminals and depots where you could work together, because you couldn't do it in your own system. You were not constructed, nor could you afford to build your own. So really, collaboration in the downstream system took place of massive recreating tanks and service station changes that would be required. And I think that collaboration is a common theme of systems of the future, the requirement for the need in multidisciplinary and in collaborative efforts. One part that is perhaps didn't go so well is obviously one of the big challenges was, how much is this going to cost? Exactly the same question that's happening today on questions of, if you phase out one higher carbon fuel, what does it mean on the cost to me as a consumer? And because gasoline had butane in it, and butane's less expensive than gasoline, and that's what had to be removed to achieve the RVPs of these other gasolines, by nature it was going to cost more. How do you ensure that that cost doesn't impact the system to a degree that you can't actually introduce such a legislation. Well, it was introduced. When I spent 2 years as president of the Western Rocky Mountains for fuels, it was clear that there were a number of people that had nothing to do with the energy industry and some that did, that openly shared how much cleaner Los Angeles was than it had been 10 years previous. So the introduction of these laws did do the justice to the clean air, and obviously also brought along the challenges of what would the cost be. The other thing very important in systems, in this one as well, is that you want to make sure that when you're in this, that the participants that you want in the marketplace get to stay. And there are clearly winners and losers when major system infrastructure takes place. So looking at some of those past lessons, collaboration to use for the future. That systems include more than infrastructure, it's the policy, regulation, and markets as well. And my belief, and this is purely mine, that energy can work policy at a federal level. And it has nothing to do, this has been ready for a month or so, nothing to do with yesterday's announcement, but I do believe you can put policy in place with the right people helping develop the systems to ensure it's enacted in the proper way. So let me go now to the vignettes of future energy systems, and this is where my thanks earlier to INCOSE to look at energy, and my great recognition that the skills in this room that have been used in defense, used in space, and used in medicine and other areas are the same type of skills that can be purposed in many cases, system skills, to the energy world to help for the transition that it is going through. I'm going to talk about 3 what I would call systems of systems, work I'm very close to because it's deeply underway at CASE. And when I talk about them, I'll talk about the size on the y-axis, because we're now working with from material scale to component level to devices, all the way to systems and systems of systems. And when you work in that level, and I talk now about failure, the complexity only continues to grow as you learn in your own work. And as well, along a time scale, introducing technologies and looking at the failure of technologies over multiple, current, all the way to long life. The work that's going on at Case Western is under Roger French, who's just joined in the last 3 years after 24 years with DuPont. And Roger has recognized that engineered systems continue to fail and believed that the way of looking at them requires a new paradigm, and he's working on that new paradigm at Case Western. He's working on a paradigm that is ultimately effective, and this works well in energy, for high-cost systems with long life that live in very harsh environments. And he has started the work and been funded over $10 million in the last couple of years around solar, and is now building it in storage, power electricity systems, and wind in energy. And I will also say, because there are medical folks in the room, he's also working with the medical school at Case to work in replacement parts, pacemakers and electronics, as well as limbs and dental implants and crowns. And what he's doing is basically utilizing 3 processes to work at this material level on the bottom all the way up to a systems of system. He's utilizing, number 1, epidemiology, what has been used in medicine for many years to take lots of data and access it, not pull it into your systems, but know where it is and access it, to know the time, environment, constraints, everything about the failures that have occurred over past history by utilizing that epidemiology. He then, with somebody who has done it in medicine, has built the second piece, which is informatics, how to actually look at that data. And instead of trying to think of what hypothesis should I be looking at for the failure of solar systems with different companies, there are over 28 companies being worked with and 8 that are on the platform today. Those companies to be able to look and say, what hypothesis based on this data should I use? And then lastly, prognostics, to be able to take that and then predict what might the failure look like in the future. This is really the emergence for our work into big data, and this term that I don't fully understand, but I am beginning to see in this work the clear indications of where data and information turned into informatics and hypotheses to help engineers not have to know everything that's going on in the world, but know where it's coming from and what informatics tells, help insert new technologies. And ultimately, every one of those companies that's working with Roger right now is working because they want to understand, for the technologies they have, how do they improve the failure rates. And it's the reason solar was a sweet spot to begin, is because of the incredible degradation of solar very soon after it's installed. And it is the reason that there is so much interest to also to be able to predict the future, because you have to insert in this system lots of components and technology when you're in the United States and there's lots of existing infrastructure, and this helps to do it. I'll talk now about the electricity system in transition, from straight piping to an internet of movement of potential electricity, from centralized power generation to what is starting to look like decentralized distributed power generation, microgrids, as well as wind and solar intermittent supply, and from very predictable loads where the power company knew what we were going to do, to a world where they're getting smarter. And it may not be quite so easy to know exactly what each of you are going to do when you pick up your phone and choose from here, to recognize that you hear it's 91 degrees at wherever your community is, and maybe you ought to do something with your cooling at your home. So if I take the same kind of scale, but a bit of a different story, again on the y-axis you have the multiple levels that are being considered for power systems now. Some call it nanogrid, individual power load for a building or home, to the microgrid level, which are growing fast, 2.5 gigabytes of microgrids now worldwide. And they're at universities, they're at hospital systems. Department of Defense spoke about them on the first day. They're very heavily into the Department of Defense. And they're now going into communities in developing countries, and they're also being looked at in communities here in the United States. The grid, as we've known it traditionally, and then equally important, grids of grid. How will the electricity grid overlap with the water grid and overlap with the natural gas grid? And when we're thinking systems, how do we begin to think of that now? Because I entrust there'll be a lot more overlap than we're necessarily planning for. On the time scale, to the left of that dashed line, I want you to imagine operating power systems today. They're operating with faults at milliseconds and seconds. They're operating at markets at 5-second intervals and 15-second trading and day-ahead trading and 14-day trading and further out than that, but very small time periods. And they're going to have to do more of that in the future. Customers are beginning to take more charge and proliferate what they are going to do with devices that will help them manage. That's both in the existing system at a small level, but likely coming at a much larger level in the future system. And storage, just being tested today, has potential, and I'll talk about storage. And in the timeline to the right, you see also very early, 3 to 5 year period, the investment period. Who's going to invest in this infrastructure, and how do they get their return on that investment? You see the applied research from utilities. You see fundamental research and applied research from universities and industry participants and national labs. And you see the regulation world that has to think. I shared earlier that for 100 years, over 100 years, the regulation put in place at the time of the Rockefeller era still lives, much of it. So when you think of systems, thinking of the regulation and the unintended consequences of that regulation is equally important now. So what do I see as some of the changes that may be coming? In this operating grid, materials. There are lots of new things going on in recognizing the age of existing infrastructure and conductor materials and what may have to happen for improvement. And for new systems, either developing countries or elsewhere, there is lots of work going on in the use of nanotechnology that has now made its way into the electricity world and is being deeply considered, and carbon nanotechnology in many cases. In the faults world, multi-agent sensor technologies and control systems that are being looked at now. These can be imposed today because there are problems today on 50-plus-year-old systems that folks are working on. At this borderline markets, there are tremendous markets that are set up, but they are different areas of the country, and the look of how will the whole country run together if you look 25 years out? And if you have microgrids and such, how do you have distribution markets that are at a much smaller scale, are both topics being worked right now. I talked about the cell phone. I want to go into the little batteries. That's what's in the middle. We had the opportunity about a month ago, sponsored by Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland, to have Daniel Yergin speak. Daniel Yergin wrote the book, The Prize. He recently has written the book, The Quest, that is about the energy industry. And he is known as helping the energy industry think about where they are and where they're going, and is a great writer. And he mentioned that today shale has changed energy in a very short period, and it obviously is the topic. But if he were to look at a topic that may be tomorrow's, the storage of electricity is one that he would look to. And so when I hear somebody from Daniel's perspective say that, I think of the work that's going on. I think of the Department of Energy already with the new announcement of a new Secretary of Energy pulling together resources this summer in electricity storage to look at what program they want to develop going forward. I already see that this is a likely space that certainly is going to have that applied and fundamental research going on at this point. Down below at the building level, you know, our cell phones are pretty much as smart as the average building technology today. The building efficiency, I talked about the combustion engine, it's great efficiency, the building sits over here. And so building efficiency and the opportunity to learn from the technologies that are going to go on in grid, sensor technologies, control technologies, they are going to work right into the building technologies of the future. And the appreciation for loads such as electric vehicle loads, wherever those may occur, at home, at business, elsewhere. Microgrids, I mentioned, definitely beginning to proliferate and have opportunities to do some things that may not have been as easy in the past. So the idea of DC current, which wasn't adopted many, many, many years ago, is now coming back into the mix and being relooked. Do we need to take DC generated electricity, convert it to AC and back to DC for loads, or can we go back to loads that may work better on DC and direct? And that is underway at not only many companies and universities, but again, to imagine it as a systems engineer, it has to be part of the overall conversation of where are we going in electricity systems and what has to be considered. And then at the top, I'll talk in a moment about water, because I believe, again, that the connection between these three is much closer than maybe the planning we have done in the past between these three. And I overlay this with the same picture with just data, because again, I can't underestimate the value of systems engineers and the work you've done in other areas that could be purposed toward the electricity space in the future. And a lot of the modeling work you do and a lot of the modeling infrastructure that you've done it with, I think is very applicable to the world and where things are going forward. So in terms of water, and I'll talk about it, but I think natural gas is very similar. We know that the cities of the future, I was just reading about a month ago, but it is an older report from Siemens, the priority that folks chose for in developing countries as to what resource they cared most about. Transport, so that they could get things back and forth to make their village usable energy, which produces water, health, clean water that health comes with. And as I looked through those priorities, I thought, if you're developing the cities of the future, they care about the social, the ecological, and the economic side. How do you think about water in this same picture? And so I will share a little work that's going on, but it's not sophisticated enough to use, or I would have put it up here. And that is, there's lots of work out there that shows the resources, the use of water in generating electricity. So it takes the water usage to pull natural gas out of the ground and process it, the water usage for the nuclear industry, the water usage for biofuels, and then it takes a look at how much water usage there is in the cooling of that in thermal plants and creating the electricity. And what we're trying to do is take a look at the total water usage and map it against the energy time, the same kind of picture I showed earlier. What's the water usage of every type of fuel into the power electricity system? And what is the length of time to permit to ultimately produce that energy? So that if you're creating a developing country's system and infrastructure, we are responsible in looking at all parts. And when we choose the energy of choice, we recognize what the water picture looks like for that community. And there are many studies out there that suggest by 2030, 2035, the same time period we talked earlier, 2/3 of the world will be stressed in water. And so thinking of, we can't just create the electricity, we also have to think of their water usage is a critical overlap. The water usage today is obviously extremely high for biofuels and nuclear. It looks good for natural gas. It even, at least some of the early work, looks okay for natural gas with the heavy use of water in shale development. And it obviously looks very good for wind and solar. So as we look at communities adopting wind and solar, oftentimes they're not only thinking of energy, they're thinking of where I am and what's my water situation. The same holds true, and I hadn't thought about this till I heard somebody speak a couple days ago, but in existing infrastructures where we have communities. I'll take mine in Ohio, where they're looking right now at fresh water lake and what's the usage of water going to be to create the natural gas in the shale formations of the Utica and Marcellus in eastern Ohio and western Pennsylvania. They're looking at energy needs and electricity needs for that region. And they're also looking at putting it into the natural gas system. All of those are very interconnected. So we have to be thinking, and we are, and have been watching some of the results, at how much more electricity may be needed if the natural gas world takes off as much as it says it's going to in the state of Ohio, and are we ready for that? All of these, again, incredibly linked. So what do I see as opportunities that I would offer could be INCOSE opportunities? And I want to take you to Hollywood. It's great that Los Angeles won the President's Award. Congratulations to Los Angeles. We're in Hollywood now. And I want to think of the roles of somebody who's producing a play, because we're really trying to imagine an energy world that is a play and has lots of parts to put together. So in this world, there's a playwright. Who will be the leader of the future of energy systems to imagine what is its objective? What is that system going to look like? And how do these systems of systems interconnect in order to ensure that happens? Somebody has to draw that story. I call that the playwright. The producer, again, a topic I've seen in the last couple of days, energy standards and policy. Who looks to the next level down and opens the book, and the first thing they think about is, what are we going to use to guide this story? The director, another common theme, arose yesterday from Brian in the keynote about multidisciplinary, collaboration, interdisciplinary. The recognition that teams are not looking the same as they did. We in education realize the incredible challenge on education institutes to be able to make price equal value. And part of that is the challenge of students today to have to and want to work in interdisciplinary topics and interdisciplinary teams. And I see that key role of the director is to ensure that that collaboration takes place. There are those that have to do the work, the actors and actresses as I call them. And I see work in two large areas. Obviously the research, the development, the implementation, the infrastructure, everything that takes place. And also ensuring the funding. Because what's very difficult for this producer and director is if one year there's a lot of investment and the next year there's not much and the next year there's a lot of investment, and somehow ensuring price signals that help those that want to invest is very important. I'm encouraged by major energy companies that I have seen of late who probably had a lot of cash on their balance sheets start to invest it in making moves toward electricity systems, for example, because I believe that those are some signals that suggest they see a future world where this is helpful. Across energy, those signals and funding need to occur. And then I often sit here, so I can talk powerfully about this one, which is there has to be somebody that is thinking about the off-ramps and the unintended consequences. We don't ever want that to stop progress. But we do want it to sit in a position where we have the opportunity to know that somebody's thinking about the big challenges that are going to occur with this system and make sure that the information has passed through the system. And a lot of that, when I put it back to the data, the use of epidemiology, the use of informatics, the use of prognostics, data can help us see the full picture to help us think about the unintended consequences with the sophistication that you have going on in systems today. So with that, thank you.
We have time for a couple of questions. Dianne has very graciously said she will stay as long as you have questions. We'll do it off the stage. I'll take a couple, I'll watch the time. What we don't get to, she'll answer them later. Yes, sir.
Dianne, I wanted to thank you for an excellent presentation. I was very impressed with it. I have a comment and a question. The comment refers to the premise of diversity. I would argue that the future of energy sources appears to be diverse today because we're going through a period of transition. That for any particular application, one source tends to dominate because it's cheapest and most convenient. Used to be coal, then with the rise of automobiles and a transition of space heating from coal to oil, it became oil. And now we have a shift towards natural gas. But the diversity of the future depends a lot on the real system costs of the various opportunities that are in front of us. And I would argue that the future is likely to be as dominated by a single source as it has been in the past. My question, though, refers to the issue of storage. Storage is very important, but why haven't we run the system analysis to put requirements on storage? Why haven't we done the trade-offs to identify what kind of storage can make a difference? The answers to that will really drive the future of a lot of renewable sectors, and in terms of priorities, it would seem to me that the analysis of storage as opposed to the device generation of storage should be receiving a high priority.
Thank you. So thank you for your comment. On the storage topic, there's a very interesting piece of work, if you're interested in this space at all, by Jim Iyer, supported by the Department of Energy out of Sandia. And it's doing a little bit of just that. Two changes I've seen, and recognizing I've been in academia only 5 years, this is probably poor history, but two changes that I have seen in the last 5 years that I have been working in this storage space. One has been the recognition, and this piece of work happens to show it, I believe, well, that storage can be used for multiple purposes in electricity storage. And if you can identify the economics for each of those, what they have to operate at, you can start to get closer to then understanding which type of storage devices and technologies will be able to work at those economics, will be able to serve that purpose, and therefore are the most likely to perhaps make it to market. That piece of work identifies 17, I think it's more than that now, 20 types of uses of storage. And I do believe it's a very good piece of work. Part of that has made its way into another practice I've seen that I think has been useful in the last few years, and that is that in some of the proposals from the Department of Energy and Storage, and CASE has a 80-year history in electrochemistry, so storage is one of the spaces we've done some work in. But that work has made its way into where now the RFPs actually indicate the level of economics you have to meet in order to put in a proposal. And I think that, I encourage that, because I believe that for our faculty, development and understanding the economics is a very important piece of it. I hope that answers your question.
Right over here, and then we'll ask Dianne to, we'll thank her.
Firstly, thanks very much for a really interesting presentation. During your presentation, and even during the last answer to the question, you mentioned economics several times. One of the things I don't see on many engineering bachelor's or master's degree is that the engineers should go off and do economics. You mentioned history. What do you see as those important skills which maybe we don't bring from the engineering degrees? What is it we need to do as systems engineers to actually be able to operate in the space you're talking about?
That's great, thank you. So let's, I would say that from my own personal experience, I learned it by being in a performance management company for 25 years where you managed by the quarter. And so I didn't have it in school. I think one of the challenges today, I'll speak from academics and then I'll answer your question of what do I think we need. One of the challenges today is that when we take an engineer and put them into a company or into further education at the end of a 4-year degree, we recognize that you expect them to have the fundamentals. And so we cram all those fundamentals into that 4-year degree. There are two challenges posed, one that I heard a couple of days ago, which is a great one, whoever said the degree ends at 4 years. And it touches a bit on where we've all gotten our education post that 4 years. And the other is that in engineering schools, the challenge on looking at those areas that are electives is becoming far more, there's a lot of work going on in that space to begin to work. We are doing it at Case Western. I know other schools are doing it with the Weatherhead School of Management in our case, to begin to offer classes that are about the economics. What I think you have to know by the number of times I mentioned it, it's critical for any system to understand the economics. So how we get it, at least at the undergrad level, we've got to begin to offer it more to students, I believe, and they want to choose that. But as well, I think there has to be post-education, and we have to think of that much deeper than we have in the past. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, Maria Illich from Carnegie Mellon University. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Please.
Yeah, Maria Illich from Carnegie Mellon University. Hi, Dianne, thank you. I think it's related to both questions. My comment and a little bit of a question is that to answer some of these questions on storage and also the education, I think we've fallen quite a bit behind with systems thinking about the value of and integration of these technologies into actual operation, because these multiple scope values, economies of scope, rather than just capacity values of storage and so forth, they cannot be assessed, they cannot be integrated unless you take a step back and think about the energy systems as a system over different time scales and space and context and so forth. So we don't teach economics that way. We don't teach policy. I sit at CMU in 2 different departments, electrical engineering, computer engineering, and public policy. And before that, I was at MIT for 15 years, trying to actually do some of those links. And I think there's going to be quite a bit of price to pay if we don't actually think about these technologies, because they are not traditional capacity technologies. How much storage you need on the system will depend on how much temporal stuff you need to compensate for. They're very expensive technologies, but they have value. And at CMU, we have some, pretty active program, but I don't see that much of an effort at the national level in really teaching things from the systems point of view. So it's more of a comment than actually a question. So.
Well, thank you, Maria. I also would say that one thing that comes out of your comment is the multidisciplinary nature that I urge in a system will help bring that into play. And I shared a couple days ago, it'll be my last comment in development. I thought the last 2 days have been excellent in thinking of us as engineers and what our role is. I learned years ago from someone to think of a career as a capital T, where the base of the T is what are you incredibly strong at, and do that well and keep building on it. And the top of the T is where do you broaden? Sometimes you broaden and don't like it, sometimes you broaden and, as I say, they don't like you. But in all of that, you can never broaden enough to think of this systems engineering as Maria has laid out, and therefore the multidisciplinary team is critical. Thank you very much. Much appreciated.